Welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. And now, here's Chris McCann.
Good evening and welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Bible study in the book of Genesis. Tonight is study number 10 of Genesis chapter 32, and we'll begin reading in verse 24. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh. And the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And I'll stop reading there. Okay, we know that Jacob is 100 years old at this point in time, and that he's had dealings with God for quite a number of years, and yet something is different. As we read this account, suddenly Jacob finds himself in a wrestling match with God, and he's all alone. He's all alone. It's just him and this man. Now, it does say there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day, but we shouldn't think that just some stranger happened along and grabbed him and started wrestling with him. No, that this man is God, and we're told that a little further on in verse 30, where it says, And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. So the man is God. He sees God face to face, and he wrestles with him. There wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. But before we look at some of those words, let's first look at the first part of verse 24 as we read that Jacob was left alone. And the word left is Strong's number 3498 in the Hebrew Concordance. And it's translated that way a few times. And we find in the book of Ezekiel, in Ezekiel chapter 6, verse 8, it says, Yet will I leave a remnant. And the word leave is the same word. That ye may have some that shall escape the sword among the nations when ye shall be scattered through the countries. Leave a remnant. Also, in Ezekiel chapter 14, verse 22, it says, Yet behold, therein shall be left a remnant that shall be brought forth, both sons and daughters. Behold, they shall come forth unto you, and ye shall see their way and their doings, and ye shall be comforted concerning the evil that I have brought upon Jerusalem, even concerning all that I have brought upon it. Therein shall be left a remnant. And so in both of those verses, the word left is related to a remnant, and the remnant has to do with God's elect, who are few. We also find the same word a couple of times in Zechariah. Well, it's found in other places too, but these are the ones that we're going to go to. In Zechariah chapter 13, verse 8, we read there, And it shall come to pass that in all the land, saith Jehovah, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third shall be left therein. And the third part also identifies with God's elect. And then in the next chapter, Zechariah 14, verse 16, it says, And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem, that is, the nations came against Jerusalem, but they that are left of them would be the remnant of the nations. Everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, Jehovah of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Again, telling us God's elect will keep the Feast of Tabernacles in the spiritual sense in the end time fulfillment of that feast, which is over the course of 40 years, according to what we can read from the Bible, beginning in 1994, the Jubilee year, through 2033. So when we're looking at this passage, and it starts out by telling us Jacob was left alone, we are guided, I think, by the use of this word left, to see Jacob as a type of the elect. And of course, we know he is used that way often in the Bible, but we have been seeing him used as a picture of Christ. But here, Jacob was left alone, and God tells us concerning his election program in Romans chapter 9, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. So again, it would appear the elect are in view, the body of Christ. So Christ is always in view, even when the elect are in view. But it goes on to say in verse 24, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. I mentioned in our last study, the word wrestled is number 79 in a concordance, and it's found 2 times in the Bible, and both times are in this passage. So that doesn't help us too much. But number 79 is related to number 80, and they're identical consonants and very similar vowel pointing, but slightly different. And number 80 is used 6 times, and it's translated as small dust or dust in some of these places. Let's go to Exodus 9, verse 9. Exodus chapter 9, verse 9 says, and this is concerning handful of ashes of the furnace that Moses will sprinkle, and it shall become small dust in all the land of Egypt, and shall be a boil breaking forth with blains upon man and upon beasts throughout all the land of Egypt. And this is describing one of the plagues God is sending upon the Egyptians, and each of the plagues would identify with the wrath of God. God is bringing judgment on Egypt. Also in Deuteronomy 28, verse 24, it says, Jehovah shall make the rain of thy land powder and dust. From heaven shall it come down upon thee until thou be destroyed. And again, this verse has to do with the pronouncement of God's judgment upon a rebellious people. It is describing the wrath of God, which would spiritually be fulfilled with the judgment that began at the house of God, the corporate church. And so that's twice, and this word is only found 6 times. And we won't go to every one of them, but you can look it up. Again, it's Strong's number 80, and you'll see in all 6 places it is used in connection with wrath and judgment. Another place is found in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 24. Isaiah 5:24 says, Therefore, as the fire devoureth the stubble, and the flame consumeth the chaff, so their root shall be as rottenness, and their blossom shall go up as dust, because they have cast away the law of Jehovah of hosts and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. Another verse clearly identified with God's judgment and wrath. And one more that we'll turn to in Nahum chapter 1. Nahum chapter 1, verse 3. Jehovah is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked, Jehovah hath his way in the whirlwind and in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. And again, the word dust in relationship to whirlwind and storm, the wrath of God, describing the wrath of God. So what does it tell us? Well, it's difficult. It's difficult to draw the connection between this man wrestling with Jacob and this word dust. As you can see, it doesn't really have to do with the dust of the ground. It has to do with dust in regards to some aspect of God's judgment. And I think that's one thing we can safely take away. We don't have to define wrestling. We can understand it to be wrestling, but it's also wrestling that based on the word that is, again, the identical word as far as the consonants go with this other word translated as dust or small dust and having to do with God pouring out judgment, that it can be our understanding that what's happening here has to do with the judgment of God or the wrath of God. And Jacob was left alone. He is this remnant. He is all by himself. And there wrestled a man. And we know the man is God. God wrestled with him. And it has to do with the wrath of God until the breaking of the day. Now, this language will confirm that it does have to do with the wrath of God. And it's repeated if we read verses 25 and 26. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. God, this man wrestling with Jacob, is saying to Jacob, let me go, for the day breaks. And Jacob refuses and says, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And so there must be something very important about this breaking of the day. The wrestling continues until the breaking of the day, and the day was breaking when God said to Jacob, let me go, let me go. The Lord did not want to continue the wrestling match into the breaking of the day. He was willing to wrestle him until that point, but he did not want to wrestle with him past that point. Is apparently what's going on. And so, this makes us very interested. What is this breaking of the day referring to? And we find the same words, breaking and breaketh, are the same Hebrew word, and the word day. Now, the word day is not the typical Hebrew word for day, which is yom. And that's 3117 in the concordance, and it's found, hundreds and hundreds of times. This is a different word, and it's used here as well as in Genesis chapter 19. Genesis 19, and I'll start reading in verse 12. And we read, And the men said unto Lot, Hast thou here any besides son-in-law, and thy sons and thy daughters? And whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxing great before the face of Jehovah, and Jehovah has sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for Jehovah will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. And when the morning arose, and there we have the same two words, breaking of day, that are in our verse in Genesis. And so we could read, and when the day breaketh, but here's what it says. And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy 2 daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his 2 daughters, Jehovah being merciful unto him. And they brought him forth and set him without the city. Okay, so again, we know this is the chapter where God is destroying Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plain. And it's about to happen. It's about to happen. And God has entered into Sodom, at the gate of Sodom. Lot met him, took him to his house, and then the wicked men of the city wanted to know them and so forth. And now it's reached the point where fire and brimstone is about to fall from heaven, and the angels are hastening Lot. Get out of the city. Take your wife and 2 daughters and get out. But Lot lingered, so they took hold of his hand, and the hand represents the will, and brought him forth out of the city, God being merciful to him. And that is a picture of God's salvation as they came out of the city and fled to the little city of Zoar. And the Lord waited for them to enter into that city before he rained down fire and brimstone from heaven. So when the morning arose, it brought judgment day. It brought the wrath of God. The day breaketh. And that's what the day brought forth. Now also, if we go over to Joshua chapter 6, when Joshua and the Israelites are going about the city Jericho, we read in Joshua chapter 6, starting in verse 12, And Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of Jehovah, and 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of Jehovah went on continually, and blew with the trumpets, and the armed men went before them, but the reward came after the ark of Jehovah, the priests going on and blowing with the trumpets. And the second day they compassed the city once, and returned into the camp. So they did 6 days. And it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose early about the dawning of the day. The same 2 words. The dawning of the day, the morning arose in Genesis 19, and the day breaketh in Genesis 32. They're the same words, and they rose early about the dawning of the day and compassed the city after the same manner 7 times. Only on that day they compassed the city 7 times. And it came to pass at the 7th time, when the priests blew with the trumpets, Joshua said unto the people, Shout, for Jehovah has given you the city. And we know what happened next. The walls fell down, and the Israelites easily destroyed the inhabitants of Jericho, except for Rahab and her family. And the significant thing is that they went around the city once a day for 6 days, totaling 6 times. Then on the 7th day, they went around 7 times. And so the sum total will be 13 times around. And after the 13th time around Jericho, the walls fell down. And that happened the same day. As we read, they rose early about the dawning of the day. That day would be Judgment Day for Jericho, and 13 times around the city would have been reached. And that ties into the end of the world, as the end stage of Earth's history began in the year 1988, which was the 13,000th year of history of time since the creation, and Judgment Day began, as judgment began at the house of God and has continued ever since. So this phrase, this language that we're reading in Genesis 32, we can understand to relate to the wrath of God, just as the word wrestled, the small dust, relates to God's wrath, so too does the phrase, the day breaketh, or until the breaking of the day. So the wrestling between Jacob and this man who is God continued all the night until the breaking of the day, until the time of judgment is coming. And then we read in verse 25, and when he saw, and the pronoun, masculine pronoun, is referring to the man who is God. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. Very strange, very unusual. When God saw that he prevailed not against him, that is, he wasn't able to defeat Jacob, and we realize, of course, God is almighty, all-powerful God, and the only way that he would not prevail against this puny little finite man, Jacob, is if God did not want to prevail. If God enabled Jacob and strengthened Jacob and gave him the ability to stay with him in this wrestling match. And it must have been that way. And yet God also, as Jacob is wrestling with him, touched the hollow of his thigh. And the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And we understand, if we go on a little bit, that what happened to Jacob, it says in verse 31 and 32, and as he passed over Penuel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh, unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that shrank. God touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh, and the word hollow, I mentioned last time, it's also translated as spoon or palm and hand and sole of the foot. And it's that little cup in your hand. It's when you have a spoon. There's a place where you can get the soup and bring into your mouth. It's a little hollow place. So it's a good translation of this word. It's this area of the thigh that God touched, and we know when he touched the hollow of the thigh, the sinew shrank, and that resulted in Jacob walking with a halt. He was lame. From this time forward, he'll be lame, and so that's something for us to think about. But let's first look at this word touched, and we find that it's in the book of Job a few times. So if we go to Job chapter 19, Job 19, it says in verse 21, and this is Job speaking under inspiration of God, have pity upon me, O ye my friends, for the hand of God hath touched me. And Job is telling his friends the hand of God has touched him because of the calamities that have befallen him. And we know the story. Just read the first couple of chapters of Job, and it's just horrible. It's extremely tragic what happened to this man and his family, with the loss of 10 children, the loss of all riches, even worse, and still everything happening at once. And And so the word touched is actually used back in Job chapter 1, as we will start reading in verse 9 there. Then Satan answered Jehovah and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made a hedge about him, and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And Jehovah said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of Jehovah. Here is why Satan is the accuser of the brethren. He is accusing Job, as God had said in verse 1, he was a perfect and upright one that feared God and eschewed evil. And so Satan comes along and accuses Job before God. Well, does he fear you for naught? Is it not with cause, in other words, that he fears you? Have you not made a hedge about him and in his house, and his substance is increased in the land? But put forth thine hand, touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. You see the word touch there. It's used in the sense of allowing affliction, allowing grievous affliction and tribulation to come to Job. And Satan says, if you touch him, then he will curse you to your face. And we see that God is touching the hollow of Jacob's thigh and causes the sinews to shrink. And this results in Jacob being lame. There's an interesting tie-in in verse 10 of Job 1, where it says, Hast not thou made a hedge about him and about his house, and so forth. The word hedge, 7753, is also found in Job chapter 10, in Job 10, verse 11, where it says, Thou hast clothed me with skin and flesh, and has fenced me, that's our word hedge, and has fenced me with bones and sinews. This is, again, Job, who the Lord is moving to say this. He's been clothed with skin and flesh and fenced or hedged with bones and sinews. Well, you see, Satan is accusing this hedge, this fence about him, to be the reason why he fears God. But if you take away the hedge or the fence, then he'll curse you. And you see, fence with sinews, and we find God touching Jacob's sinews. And if he's touching them, there's no fence around it, is there? There's no hedge, no protection. He went right for the sinews and caused them to shrink. And then we find that Jacob will walk with a limp for the rest of his life.
Thank you for joining us for eBible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies and information, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. Until our next Bible study, may the Lord's perfect will be done.